Hello, everyone. I was slightly muted for a second, and we were flipped. It
I
threw
know.
me off.
There's so much stuff going on.
Flipped. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the what week is it anyway? It's week 9, the halfway point of the NFL season. It's the point in the season when I start to forget which week it is. The week 9 NFL Fantasy Life live stream Sunday morning. We are going to, 10:30 a.m., just depending on the frequency of questions. I'm Matthew Freedman. He is Chris Allen. Chris, how's it going?
I'm doing well, man. I got the extra hour of sleep. I'm ready to dive into the extra action we've got going on today. I mean, full slate for this week. Another big week of games. So happy to take as many questions as we can and hop right on into it, man.
All right. I got to say, I feel like there are two types of people who have approaches to the extra hour. It's either maybe 3 types of people. It's either like the extra hour of sleep crowd or the extra hour of partying crowd. Or like the third people who are fantasy analysts, and it's like the extra hour of grinding crowd. That happens too. Like people tinkering with their DFS lineups, like looking at the waiver wire to see if Julius Chestnut is still available.
Right.
The people like that. There are some true sickos who do that between the second 1 o'clock hour that they have on this Saturday night. So, all right. Anyway, welcome to everyone who is joining us. Let's start to get into it. Tillman or Keenan Allen this week or rest of season. So we'll kind of take this in 2 parts this week first, and then rest of season after that. By the way, we've got rankings for free on the site at FantasyLife. And you can check out that the rest of season rankings that we have there created by our guy Waz. Let's do this week first. Cedric Tillman, I am incredibly bullish on him for this week and for the rest of the season. He was one of the guys I wrote up in my Freeman's Favorites article this week. So a number of things going his direction. He's got one, no more Amari Cooper on the team. And then 2, no more Deshaun Watson on the team, which is some, addition by subtraction there. So with no Amari Cooper, he's obviously gotten a world of playing time. And if you look at our, I would say, industry leading utilization report, an 87% route rate, 23% target rate, 24% target share over his past 2 games. Last week with Winston, without Watson, 99 yards, 2 touchdowns receiving on 9 targets. The week before that, I think he had 14 targets. Like, he's the number 1 wide receiver, if not the number 1 pass catcher on that team, going against the Chargers, who do not have number 1 cornerback Asante Samuel. And in fact, actually, I'm betting the over on Tillman's yardage prop. If you look in our free Fantasy Life bet tracker, I like Tillman a lot. Like, he's the real number 1. And he's got like a quarterback who is like really volatile, but like certainly willing to chuck it down the field. So he's the number 1 wide receiver, and he's got a quarterback who doesn't mind giving his guys an opportunity to make plays. Keenan Allen, a lower ADOT player at this point of his career, and he's still with a rookie quarterback who, Caleb Williams has a ton of potential, but like he has a lot of downside too at this point of his career, just in terms of like being able to support multiple weapons in the offense. So just like on the face, without even looking at my rankings, I prefer Cedric Tillman. But then I'd also want to be like, hey, what do my rankings say? But I like Tillman a lot this week.
No, and I agree with you. You're not going to get much pushback from me on Keenan Allen versus Cedric Tillman. I think the opportunities are both there for both of them. Just last week, Keenan Allen had a 30% target share in the Bears offense, but we know how talented the other Bears pass catchers are right now. Like DJ Moore, we know he can pop off for some good games here and there. And also the hope would be, and this is probably more for the dynasty managers out there, hope is that we see a bit more from Rome Odunze as well. But with the fact that Caleb Williams has been seeing pressure at one of the higher rates like in the league so far, and not being able to create like once he is under pressure. We've seen a lot of sacks, seen a few scrambles here and there, and also some interceptions. I mean, the problem for the Bears offense is that they can't really find some sort of like stable ground in order to create this passing game that we expected coming into the season. Whereas with Jameis Winston, over 10-yard ADOT, like in his first game as a full starter, that's the highest of any of the Browns quarterbacks like so far this season. I think it's easier for me to see a scenario where they're like Tillman and Keenan, they might have similar target shares, but because Tillman operates in the intermediate parts of the field, that allows him to rack up more yardage, more stuff after the catch. I can see Tillman being the better option just for week 9. Rest of the season, we'll see if Caleb Williams and like the hype that we had for the Bears starts to pick up. But for right now, I think it's Tillman without much of a doubt.
Yeah. So, looking at our rest of season rankings, Waz has the edge going to Tillman there. And I would just say that feels correct. Like,
Yeah.
we know what Keenan Allen is at this point of his career, and he's on the downside of his career. Like, Tillman is in the ascension phase, and there's like more of an unknown with him. But I would say, like, if you ask yourself this question, which one of these guys has the better chance of being a league winner? Like, what a better chance of finishing as a wide receiver 1? And that's really kind of like what you're hoping for, in evaluating these guys. Like, which one actually makes a difference to my roster? I would say it's going to be Tillman. He has the greater likelihood. All right. This is from Tom. Good morning, guys. Good morning, Tom. Half PPR flex, Waddle, Dowdle, or Kyle Pitts. All right. So, Waddle was in that Tua list, like purgatory state for a little bit of time. Dowdle, I believe, missed last week with
he was
kind
sick.
of last second illness. I mean, whatever that means. And then Kyle Pitts, long disappointing, and then now actually, really kind of stepping up and looking like the guy that everyone hoped he would be, when they've drafted him multiple past seasons. Out of these 3, who are you thinking about?
For me, it would probably go, if all things being equal, half PPR flex. Like, I would look at Dowdle first, Pitts after that, and then Waddle. I'm probably going to be like Xing out most of the Miami pass catchers, just looking at his history going up against the Bills. I think he has just one game like in his time as a starter in Miami with over 300 yards passing. I think maybe 1 or 2 outings against the Bills for his career with multiple touchdown passes. And that's really where like Waddle's going to be able to make like his production as a fantasy asset. So if you're asking about any of the Miami guys, he's probably going to be at the back end of the list for me. But the hope would be that this week for Dowdle getting back in the driver's seat for the Cowboys offense, that they can actually show out a bit more from an efficiency standpoint. And if you go and look at our DVP tool that's available on FantasyLife.com, the Falcons, they sit about the league average in terms of fantasy points allowed to the running back position. So I would say that like in this matchup where we think they're going to be able to at least put up some points like against the Falcons defense, and it's more of an up-tempo type matchup. For me, I'll take the stability of Dowdle, the upside of Pitts like shortly thereafter, and then Waddle will be like, it's like a slight tier break in between like those 2 guys.
All right. So next question here, Hubbard or Chase Brown? So Chase Brown, really advantageous situation with Zach Moss being out this week. And actually, let me just totally verify if it's out or if he's just technically doubtful. He's technically doubtful, but almost certain to be out. He had a neck issue pop up, did not practice on Friday. Strongly assumed that Zach Moss is out. And so with that, Chase Brown gets a really big bump up the board. And you love the situation for him as a significant home favorite this week, and versus Hubbard, who's in an offense, that is, pretty disappointing, and will have Bryce Young as the facilitator in the offense for a second straight week. And then, pretty big underdog, even though they're at home, 7.5 point underdogs to the Saints. So Chase Brown is the guy I'm pretty cleanly going with in this situation. What do you think?
I would also lean Chase Brown. Just I'm more of a Cincinnati homer, so I wanted to let you like give your answer first before I just come in and be like, yeah, start all the Bengals guys that go up against the Raiders. But no, I think like from a statistics standpoint or a metric standpoint, like the Bengals going up against the Raiders does grade out as the better option. Raiders are about like 6th or so, like in fantasy points allowed to the running back position. Brown had already looked like he was like on track to be the breakout candidate out of that backfield anyway. But I would say though, like Hubbard, it's not a weird, like a bad question or anything at all. Hubbard from a utilization standpoint has been one of the running backs that you would want to have on your roster anyway. Like if you go and check out our utilization score, available on FantasyLife.com. I think from a utilization standpoint, Chuba Hubbard's utilization score is sitting at 7.7, which is like the top 13, 14 in the league, around like J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift, Aaron Jones, those types of like, let's say workhorse-ish like type backs. So not a bad question, but I think in this matchup going against the Raiders, like Brown is the better option of the two.
Oh yeah, not a bad question. Like both of those guys are in starting consideration.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next question here. Which Buffalo wide receiver would you want? Amari Cooper or Khalil Shakir? Thank you for the question, Jordan. All right, so Amari Cooper now 2 weeks with the team. That
Mm-hmm.
first week, limited participation in terms of the number of snaps, the number of routes, but on a per snap, per route basis, was targeted pretty heavily, and he did have that touchdown. The week after that, really nothing much happening. I would say like these two guys, and then Shakir as the guy mainly operating in the slot, does have a really established connection with Josh Allen and has been super efficient at converting targets into yards. That said, it feels like these two guys are pretty much a coin flip. Like I have Cooper at number 32 in my wide receiver rankings. I have Shakir at number 33. And then just to add more context, I have Keon Coleman at 37. So all of these guys kind of fit as like the low end wide receiver 3 type of option, in that like Josh Allen is really facilitating, really like spreading the ball around. And I think any given week, it could be one of these guys that goes off. But even when he goes off, I don't think he's going to go massively off because no one is really getting a ton of targets within that offense. How would you lean between Cooper and Shakir?
The only reason I would lean Shakir is I agree with you. I think like Cooper, at least we know where he's at. Like from a talent standpoint, you know what he is at this point in his career. And also the hope would be he gets a bit more on track from a route standpoint. 34% in his first game, 66% route rate in his second game. But I would say the lean for me goes to Shakir because Cooper has been limited all week with a wrist injury. So if we just want to just take into account the injury reports, like health-wise, I think Shakir, like the report already established that you mentioned, the health, I would say just to take away just a little bit from Cooper, I'll give it to Shakir for this week.
Okay, that's a good point. I forgot about the wrist injury. So yeah, and to even just to add a little more perspective on how tight this probably is between the two of them, I have Cooper 32, Shakir 33. Dwayne McFarland has Shakir 32, Cooper 33 in his rankings. Like it is very tight between these two. All right, Darnold or Murray this week in 6-point passing touchdown leagues. By the way, Devin, thanks for the question. I gotta say, I love 6-point passing touchdown leagues. Like I feel like I'm like a little outside of the norm in that, and I know like that format is not what you normally have in fantasy, but I do like it because it boosts the value of quarterbacks relative to other players, while still allowing for, assuming this isn't super flex, while still allowing for there to be a number of quarterback options on waiver wire. So for people who like want to be in a league where quarterbacks are a little more valuable, but you don't want to have like the scarcity crunch of quarterback issues during the season, 6-point passing touchdown leagues might be the way to go. All right. So for this question, we've got Darnold versus Murray. All right. Murray, I mean, is like, I feel like always locked inside the top 12, even if you don't really like what he's been doing so much on the passing front this year. He still does enough with his legs, even in a 6-point passing touchdown league, to warrant being in the top 10. Sam Darnold, because of the weapons around him, and then also because of the matchup that he is also elevated into the top 10. I have Darnold just a little bit ahead of Kyler Murray this week. Kyler with a tough matchup going against the Chicago Bears. Although I will say that matchup isn't quite as tough as it normally is, because they are definitely without Jaquan Brisker. They could also be without slot cornerback Kyler Gordon. Montez Sweat is also not certain to be playing in this game for the Bears. In fact, I have him projected out. So a tougher matchup, but not one that is as bad as it normally is. Still, I am slightly leaning towards Darnold, and a big part of that would be the passing touchdowns, because like I would just project him to have more of those in a 6-point touchdown league. That means more.
Yeah, I agree. And there's some chance that I think this is more of a James Conner game for the Cardinals than like Kyler Murray in the passing game. Then also let's take into account Cam Robinson, who was just recently traded from the Jaguars over to the Vikings, is supposed to make his start, even though he's only gotten in a couple of practices or maybe like a walkthrough and like maybe a short practice here and there. Now, not to say that Cam Robinson is Christian Darrisaw or anything like that. Actually, I think from a talent standpoint, they're on the opposite ends of the spectrum, like those two. But at least if there is like some stability for the Vikings, like offensive line, I'll give the edge to Sam Darnold going up against the Colts. Like even though with like DeForest Buckner being back for the Colts, they have been able to put up a bit more pressure up against opposing quarterbacks. Was it 2 weeks ago? Now this was going up against Tyler Huntley and not Tua Tagovailoa, but over a 35% pressure rate against the Dolphins, over 40% pressure rate against CJ Stroud and the Texans. But let's see if like the Vikings can give them a bit more of a bit more opposition from that standpoint. And Sam Darnold is the better option between those two. That's where I lean.
Okay, next question here from Matt. Such a baller name, by the way. All right, PPR, Devontae Smith or Josh Downs? And the PPR, might really come into play here. Josh Downs, much more of a PPR merchant. Devontae Smith, the number 2 pass catcher within his offense. And so, presumably wouldn't have quite the PPR appeal that Josh Downs would have. And then also, the switch from Anthony Richardson to Joe Flacco this week is massive for Josh Downs, because not only does he have a passer who is more accurate, but with Joe Flacco, that offense is likely to pass more in general. So a huge boost for Josh Downs. And then Downs going against the Vikings this week. If you look at the tools that we have at FantasyLife, our wide receiver DVP tool, where you can look and see how a defense does against specific positions, the Vikings are the second friendliest team on a fantasy point basis to opposing wide receivers. They allow on average 7.9 more fantasy points to opposing wide receivers relative to what those wide receivers normally do against other opponents. And so a really advantageous situation for Josh Downs. I do lean pretty strongly to Josh Downs in this spot, but I will say like a lot of that is circumstantial because of the matchup and because of the switch to Flacco.
And I think that's fair because just this past week, we saw Devonta Smith pop up for a big game against the Bengals. Now, that might have been more the fact that they were facing my Bengals in their secondary, which has been porous throughout the entirety of the year, because this was last week was the highest target share that Smith had seen all season, 37% target share. He'd only had 2 other weeks previously in the season over a 30% target share. So I could see a scenario where most of that workload or things start to at least go back to where they were normally, where AJ Brown is the guy that is where he really fits more into that wide receiver 1 role versus there being a 1A, 1B type situation as we saw last week. And Downs, I think in the 5 games or like 4 or 5 games that he's had with both Downs and Pittman, he's out targeted or had equal target share to Michael Pittman in 4 out of those 5 games. So I would say that Downs with Flacco is a better option than Devonta Smith for this week.
All right, next question here. Pick 1 running back and 1 tight end. So for running back, we're looking at Tracy, Mostert, and Chubb. We'll just stop there. And then for tight end, Hunter Henry and Hawkinson. But let's start with the running backs first. So Tyrone Tracy, the new number 1 running back for the Giants. Were there any injury issues? Okay, yes. Tracy was in the concussion protocol, but has been cleared. He's fully going. It's very tempting to just say like, okay, well, he's the number 1 guy. He's young and healthy. He's been super explosive. So that puts him for me over Nick Chubb, and then Raheem Mostert, even though he has gotten some goal line work. I'm a little more skeptical about whether that is something that is sustainable. And Devon Achane is just such a dominator within that Dolphins backfield that I kind of would just dismiss Mostert almost out of hand if he's being compared to a super explosive young running back who's ascending and who also has some pass catching capability too. So I would go with Tyrone Tracy.
I agree. If this was in a week where we could see the Dolphins offense get into the red zone a bit more often versus the uphill battle they'll most likely have against the Bills, then I would consider Mostert like in that range. And to your point, he's had more than 50% of the carries from inside the 5 over the last like 2 to 3 weeks. And that was with Achane also in the lineup. So let's go out like a couple of weeks and look at Miami when they play like the Raiders, or in like 4 weeks when they play the Patriots. Then I would consider him in this grouping. But we know that Tyrone Tracy is going to be the one getting most of the early down work, also involved in the passing game. Chubb now, like his workload picked up like last week. Remember, he's only back, like he's been 2 weeks back from that gruesome knee injury he sustained last week. So I would say between those two guys, like those are the only two I would really, or out of those 3 guys, those are the only 2 that I would really consider. And Tracy is the better of those 2 options just for this week. Nick Chubb's on his way back though, folks.
Yeah. And then it tied in Hunter Henry versus TJ Hawkinson. Henry is maybe the number 1 pass catcher within his offense.
Yeah.
I mean, given the wide receivers he's competing against, like any given week, he could easily lead that team in targets. Hawkinson,
that's his first game back.
Yeah, first game back. Number 2 option at best in that offense, and probably more like number 3 or even number 4 if Aaron Jones gets going in the receiving game. So, yeah, I would go with Hunter Henry because like we at least have a pretty good sense of what he offers within that offense. With TJ Hawkinson coming back, like maybe it's a tight end rotation for Hawkinson in his first game back. Like they're just looking to ease him in. So a lot of uncertainty with Hawkinson. I would go with Henry.
Yeah, and with the pass protection issues that we just noted, switch out Christian Darrisaw for Cam Robinson. We don't know how that, like he might actually, I wouldn't say that he's going to be used as a blocker because that typically hasn't been what Hawkinson has been used for, but still, we don't know how that offense is going to look now with that change with him being back also. So I would say Henry is the better of the 2.
All right. Question from Heather. Shout out Heather. Thanks for asking questions, being involved every week. All right. Waddle versus Worthy in PPR. So, Worthy as more of like the downfield option, not a high volume option. And then now with, DeAndre Hopkins in that offense, Worthy might be de-emphasized a little bit more. I would probably go with Waddle. Chris, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I would agree with you in this particular case. I would go with Waddle. Worthy can always pop up for a big game because we know where he's used farther downfield. Yeah. Not to say that Waddle isn't used as an explosive pass catcher as well. I think he got hit by Tua Tagovailoa for about a 20-yard gain down the right sideline last week. But still, if the hope would be that with Tua coming back, this offense starts to move a bit more efficiently, which we saw last week in what was an easier matchup and also he is like the wide receiver 2 on his team. Whereas for Worthy, he might be sitting behind DeAndre Hopkins. We know he's sitting behind Travis Kelce. And of course, once they get into the red zone, it could be some combination of Kelce, Kareem Hunt, whatever. So I would say that I said that there's an easier path for Jalen Waddle to get opportunity in his offense versus Xavier Worthy in his.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then thinking about the specifics of this week in the matchups, Waddle as an underdog on the road, 6.5 point underdog. The Dolphins are going to have to throw the ball. The Chiefs at home as 9-point favorites against the Buccaneers, like they will probably lean more into the running game. So like there's a question in terms of just like opportunities. Like Waddle could legitimately have like 2.5 or 3 more targets in this game than Xavier Worthy could. And like that means a lot, especially in PPR format.
Agree.
All right. Next question here from Billy. Shout out Billy. All right. Brian Robinson Jr. or Jaden Reed in the flex, full PPR, 6-point touchdown, I'm assuming. All right. Brian Robinson or Jaden Reed. So entering last week, sorry, let me rephrase that. Exiting last week, immediate concerns for Jordan Love. And I would say almost just kind of like the assumption that he would not play this week. He didn't practice on Wednesday with the groin injury, did practice limited on Thursday and Friday, listed as questionable, but widely expected that he actually will play this week. I was skeptical entering the week that he actually would play for a few reasons. One, just because of the injury and the fact that he tried to play through it last week and had to exit the game. the fact that they have Malik Willis, who is a perfectly competent backup quarterback within that system, and actually kind of gives them a little bit of a change up. Where opposing defenses kind of have to reorient the way that they are approaching that offense. And then also the fact that they have the bye after this. So it would have felt like a good opportunity for them to rest Jordan Love, let him get fully healthy, no risk of rushing him back, and then be fully ready to go week 11. I was wrong. And so like with Jordan Love out there, Jayden Reed, you lock him in, right? As someone that you want in your lineups, like top 12 wide receiver, even though Dwayne McFarland has pointed this out multiple times and Dwayne is always right. He doesn't have the usage of a typical wide receiver one, but he's so explosive as a playmaker and in such a great offense that you just kind of accept the highs and the lows. And in the end, it balances out to wide receiver one. Brian Robinson, of course, also fantastic on his own in a really great offense. He was on the injury report this week and is technically listed as questionable with a hamstring injury, limited in practice every day this week. So there might be some injury concern with him just in terms of like, do they lighten his load a little bit during this game, especially given that they are favorites and maybe they don't need to use him as much. What are your thoughts on these two guys?
And on top of that, so what was it, 2-3 weeks ago, he comes up on the injury report with a knee injury, missed the week after that, now has a hamstring injury. And the Commanders also elevated Chris Rodriguez to the active roster for week 9 as well. So I would say there are some pretty significant, it's not just what the player is telling us for being limited in practice, it's also what the team is telling us as well in terms of adding this extra running back to their backfield for week 9. So even if we see Malik Willis under center for the Packers, I would say that Reed with his utilization within the passing game is enough for me to say that he's the better option between those two.
Yeah, I would probably go Jayden Reed under the assumption that it is Jordan Love. If it is not Jordan Love, I would go to Brian Robinson. But pretty strongly assuming it now at this point, it is Jordan Love.
Yeah, I think everything that I've heard so far from like the Schefter bombs and stuff we get on Saturday night, like all indications are that Jordan Love is going to start. That's what I've been hearing over the last 24 hours. So I agree with you there.
Yeah, and if you look at the odds page that we have at FantasyLife, you will see that the Lions 2.5 point favorites across the board. This number used to be 3.5. And so for it to move through the key number of 3 to get to 2.5, like that is the market strongly assuming that Jordan Love is going to play. So like millions of dollars basically invested in the idea that Jordan Love will be playing this week. So yeah, I would assume that is what we see. All right. Question from Zone Read Fantasy, half PPR, need 2 wide receivers and a flex. Puka, Downs, Reed, Pollard, Tracy. So let's start with the wide receivers. So out of Puka, Downs, and Reed, we are benching one of these guys. And I mean, that's tough because I would say in theory, all 3 of those guys are players we would want. Yeah, we would want. So then there's the possibility always of kicking one of those guys into the flex. But then for the flex, you got Pollard and Tracy. Pollard, I'm just going to say very good chance that we do not see Pollard in this game. And if we do see him, he could be limited. So if you look at the Titans injury report, let me see. Bad. Yeah, it's bad. So Pollard did not practice at all this week with a foot injury and is listed as questionable. And normally when a guy doesn't practice at all, he's normally out. And then Tajay Spears practiced limited on Wednesday with a hamstring injury, did not practice on Thursday and Friday, and he is out. So if Pollard does go, then that's, theoretically good for him, but I'm very skeptical that we end up seeing him. I would say yeah. So then the question becomes like wide receiver versus Tracy in your flex, but let's start with the wide receivers, Puka, Downs, and Reed. Now Puka also on his own dealing with some significant injury issues. I think they rushed him back. Like at the time, I was skeptical that he would play last week because I thought it felt like it was too soon. And lo and behold, maybe it was too soon because this week He had the knee issue pop up again, practiced fully on Wednesday, limited on Thursday, did not practice on Friday, listed as questionable. That general trend, if you see it, full practice, limited practice, did not practice. That trend almost always results in will not play. Because that's like the classic, like, wait a minute, this guy just got injured during the week type of scenario. There are reports that the team is optimistic Puka Nacua will play. I am pessimistic because I'm a human wet blanket, but just like the team can say whatever it wants. Like the reality is what's on the injury report. So I'm skeptical we see Puka, which means I would be going with Downs and Reed. But what are your thoughts on how this shakes out?
I'm with you there. All of the Adam Schefter, the Tom Pelisseros, like those folks, the insiders of the world are saying he's expected to play. But my expectation would be, given it's not just a knee injury, but a re-aggravation to the same knee that had him sidelined for however many weeks. My expectation would be he's more of a decoy than anything else if he is out there. So I would take the healthy guys, the guys that we know are going to be earning targets, and guys that, especially for down specifically, we were just talking up about 5-10 minutes ago. So I would say that avoid the risk if you can. So let's say if you're already in the hole from Thursday night or something like that, and you need a guy that you feel can give you 7 catches for over 100 yards and a touchdown. And of course, that can be in the realm of possibility for those other guys. But going up against Seattle's defense, I mean, Puka might be able to have that in the bag. So I'd say just determine what level of risk you're willing to take on for this week. But I would say Downs and Reed grade out as the better options there.
Yeah, I would go Downs and Reed, and then it's between Puka and Tyrone Tracy in the flex. I would go with Tyrone Tracy. We talked about him earlier. Ascending number 1 running back. All right, Bears or Lions defense. I love questions like this because it makes me turn to the rankings that we have, because it's like I can barely remember like who these teams are playing, and it's like I just have to like think about, oh yeah, okay, so this is what I'm looking at. So I would just advise you to go to the rankings page. The Lions, who are the Lions playing? I just like, the Lions are playing the Packers. No, I do not want the Lions, who like I would say in almost any situation, I would just be like, take the other team. And that happens to be the Bears going against the Cardinals. Cardinals not nearly as good offensively as the Packers. I would go with the Bears in this spot.
Yeah, I agree with you there. At least from a pressure rate standpoint, the Bears can at least put up, or at least put Kyler Murray in enough situations that either he can take a couple sacks. Actually, kind of surprising that we haven't seen more of the scrambling from Kyler. It has been there over the past couple of weeks, but before that, he was taking a couple of sacks, throwing some errant passes here and there. So I would say that the Bears were probably the better option here, but I can understand folks wanting to go with the Lions just given how well they played this past week, or their special teams, I would say. Maybe not their defense, but since you get that DST combo, if Khalif Raymond winds up taking another punt return to the house, I can understand why you would want to have him on your roster.
All right. Question here from Brock. Hey, fellas. Hey, Brock. Tracy or McConkey in flex? All right, so we've talked about Tyrone Tracy previously. We haven't mentioned McConkey yet, who absolutely balled out last week. Like best game of his career to this point, and it has coincided with the Chargers coming out of the week 5 bye and opening up the offense a little bit more, just letting Justin Herbert throw a little bit more. And that has meant, just more opportunities for all of the pass catchers within that offense, especially McConkey. Now there is I would say like pretty serious concern of you have Quentin Johnston coming back. You potentially have DJ Chark coming back. And so maybe fewer opportunities overall for Ladd McConkey within that offense than what he's previously had. Still an intriguing guy. That said, Tyrone Tracy all the way for me. I just want him in my lineups, given what he has shown to this point.
Yeah. So the funny thing about using rate stats versus the raw numbers is where we can kind of get ourselves into trouble. So if I were to say that this pass catcher is getting over 20% of his team's targets, getting over like 30% of the team's air yards, like so on and so forth, just like Ladd McConkey did last week, everyone would be like, oh, he's a wide receiver 1. I want him on my roster. Ladd McConkey had 6 targets last week. That's where it's like you
Yeah.
use the rates in order to describe the team relative to the rest of his peers. But when you look at the Chargers team specifically, yes, they are still passing above expectation. So the volume hasn't been there in order for me to say that, yes, McConkey is this guy that you have to have in your roster week in and week out. Yes, he got over the century mark this past week. What 50 of it came on that long catch and run for a touchdown. So I would say that, yes, McConkey's a talented player. Yes, the Chargers are passing more, but should we just go ahead and take the past like couple of weeks to now say that that's going to be a trend that's going to continue? I don't know yet. I'm at least willing to say I'm not sure. So if you want I would say the floor of Tracy is both a rusher, the workload, and also the efficiency that he's also been able to show as a rusher. Would also lend itself to Tracy being the better option out of those two. Good player, McConkey. I will say that I'm hoping there are like still strong outings for him in the future, but I would say for right now, Tyrone Tracy is the better option for me.
Yeah, agree there. All right, from Huff and Puff, Lions definitely look at the weather. Okay, that you know what?
That's fair.
That is a fair point. Let me look at the weather here.
I already looked 0.06 inches per hour of rain expected in Green Bay. Winds around like 15 to 16 miles per hour out of the southeast, which runs slightly tangent or slightly across the stadium. So it's entirely possible that you get one of those games where there are a couple of turnovers if it's Jordan Love that's supposed to be under center. So the combination of the rain and the wind is something that we should take into account. So I get why folks would want to say like the Lions are the team that they would want to take as a defense.
I can buy that. I would still say the Bears are the better defense, like in general. And so if the answer is weather is going to cause turnovers, like maybe it does, but maybe it also just means that like the Packers play a little more conservatively and like don't turn the ball over because like they're not throwing as aggressively, they're running the ball more. Like I feel like
it could mean turnovers for on the other side. It could be Jared Goff like throwing turnovers to the Packers.
Yeah, like I would probably still go with the Bears, but good. Like it's a good point to bring up for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Jacoby Myers and Hopkins PPR. I mean Hopkins. We haven't talked about him to this point in the show. I'm still pretty skeptical about anything that we see out of DeAndre Hopkins. Like he's obviously on the downside of his career. Jacoby Myers, looking like the target guy for the Raiders outside of Brock Bowers, of course. I would go with Jacoby Myers in this spot pretty cleanly just because I feel like which one of these guys has the better chance of having 10 targets in this game? I think it's pretty clearly Jacoby Myers. Like DeAndre Hopkins, there's a chance he could have like 2 targets in this game. You know what I mean? Like he is still new within that offense, and the Chiefs are favored by 9 points at home. They might just be running the ball a lot and not needing to get much out of DeAndre Hopkins, who is older, still like coming back from leg injuries and still like new in that offense. I would go with Jacoby Myers in the spot.
Completely agree. 9% target share last week, which equates to 3 targets from Patrick Mahomes in week 8. So no, unless we're assuming there's going to be this massive jump to 15, 20% of the team's targets, which we can't project for, I think Jacoby Myers is a better option.
Yeah. All right. So the next question that we would have coming up here, I mean, come on, let's rotate.
Heavy rain I just saw another comment. Heavy rain this when we were talking about the weather. Heavy rain was forecasted for Kansas City. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at the weather, you do have multiple games. Chargers at Browns, 12 miles per hour. No rain in that, but 12 miles per hour. Patriots at Titans, 14 miles per hour. Rain tends to be, I would just say, sort of like statistically overvalued in terms of like how people will look at its impact. The wind is the thing that really matters. And then of course, like the combination of precipitation and wind is also bad, but wind matters much more. And like people will say like 15 or 20 miles per hour is like the point where it starts getting bad. And like, that's the point when it starts getting really bad. But like, there's even in terms of like, looking at the betting market of
Mhm.
like overs and unders, and then what you end up seeing in games, even at 10 miles per hour, you start to see a difference. And so I would say like once we get to double digits, like the impact isn't as great, but even at 10 miles per hour, there tends to be a difference there. So
Yep.
something to keep in mind for those games. All right. Another question here. Pick 2 in PPR: Marvin Harrison Jr., Tillman, Brian Thomas Jr., if healthy. So let's start with the Brian Thomas part of this, because there is sort of the question of like, is he healthy? And Chris, I know that you follow injury information pretty closely, especially for the site.
Mhm.
I'm kind of a little bit skeptical. Let me rephrase this. I'm not sure that we see Brian Thomas play this week. Like, there's a chance.
Mhm.
Um, but what is the reporting around Brian Thomas, who was limited in practice every day this week, listed as questionable after exiting last week with the chest injury?
Lukewarm around it, like from
Yeah.
most of the reports I've seen around the team, limited throughout the week with the chest injury. Now I know with Christian Kirk being out for the rest of the season with the collarbone injury, not really getting a ton from Gabe Davis, who's also questionable with a shoulder injury. If they could have their wide receiver one out there, they would want to try and push it. But I also share the same level of skepticism where it's, yeah, they could really use him being out there, but at the same time, if they're, I would say the indications of them trading away their starting left tackle and then having all these injuries all happen within the same, like, week to 10 days type of thing. Not to say they're trying to fold or wave the white flag on the season, but I don't know if their level of aggression is the same as it would have been maybe a couple of weeks ago when they were back in the win column and things were, and the vibes were a little bit better. I would say that there's a little bit more negativity like around the team than there was a couple of weeks ago.
Okay. So I would say if we knew Brian Thomas was starting, he would be one of the guys that we definitely would lock in,
Yep.
just because of what he's been able to do, the ability he has. And then on top of that, no Christian Kirk, the possibility of no Gabe Davis, going against an Eagles defense that is without its number one cornerback in Darius Slay. So you put all that together and really do love the situation for Brian Thomas if he is able to go. One of the problems is that his game is at 4:05 p.m. So there's no certainty that we would be able to have him there. And then the other guys who were in that matchup, Marvin Harrison, and who was the third one?
Tillman, I thought, was also on that
Yes,
list.
correct. Cedric Tillman. So yeah, Marvin Harrison, interested in him. I wish that it were one of the other wide receivers instead of Kyler Gordon, who is out, because like that doesn't really benefit Marvin Harrison all that much in the matchup against the Bears. Cedric Tillman, obviously we talked about him earlier. Love what he's able to do. Tillman is the one that I am locking in, and then I guess I would say it's between Thomas and Harrison at 4:05. And if Thomas is a go, then I'm going with Thomas and I'm benching Marvin Harrison. As wild as that kind of sounds, that is probably the way that I would play this. Tillman is the guy that I'm definitely locking in.
It was good to see Marvin Harrison Jr. being used on like crossing routes, shorter A dot targets to get the ball in his hands, and Kyler Murray connecting with him on some of those timing routes, like along the perimeter. So the development is there, but out of those two, I can understand trying to bench him this week, given those other options. I get it.
Yeah, and Tillman is playing at 1 p.m. I feel like you have to go with him, because if Thomas is out, then all of a sudden you didn't play Tillman. Thomas is out, and Harrison is the only one wide receiver you have left. So even just in terms of the sequencing of the games, I think you have to go with Tillman, and then I would be inclined to go with him anyway because he's the highest in my rankings.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question here. Mahomes or Cousins both have plus matchups, but now Parsons is out for Dallas. Yes. So let's look at the Dallas injury report to start this. It's not just that Micah Parsons is out.
Mhm.
It is also that Deron Bland, who was expected early in the week to return to action coming off of IR, he is not playing in this game. The foot issue is still there, didn't practice at all. He is out. And then on top of that, Trevon Diggs, the other starting cornerback, he did not practice at all this week with a calf injury. He is technically questionable, but he is almost certainly out for this game. And then you still have Kalen Carson, who is returning from a shoulder injury he's been dealing with for the past few weeks. He will be playing in this game, but I mean, I don't think that he is even fully recovered from his injury, and he's definitely not at the level of Diggs and Bland. So, I mean, a real defensive quagmire for the Cowboys here. Like especially just in terms of like their pass defense. So a great setup for Kirk Cousins. And then you look at Mahomes, who I think has a lot of possibility in this game, and that he's going against the Buccaneers defense that if you look at their issues for injuries, Jamel Dean, their number one cornerback, he is out. Antoine Winfield popped up on the injury report this week with a foot injury. Practiced on Friday. Practiced on Thursday, limited on Friday, did not practice Saturday. So he's technically questionable, but he has the pattern that would make you believe that he is probably out in this game. And so you have Mahomes going against a Bucs secondary that is without its two best players back there. So it's a good setup for Mahomes as well. But of course, Mahomes, big home favorite, might be in a situation where he's just not throwing the ball all that much. Kirk Cousins at home in the dome, favored by quote unquote just 3 points over the Cowboys. So it could be a situation where Cousins ends up throwing the ball more than Mahomes does in this game. What are your thoughts between these two?
I think that's where I would give the edge to Cousins here versus Mahomes, just given the game environment, like the back and forth matchup that we assume to be the case between the Cowboys and the Falcons. Because do you remember what the game total is? That 53, if I'm remembering correctly, or somewhere fairly
yes,
close to
it is 52. It is the highest on the slate.
Okay. So that's where I would lean like Cousins over that, but not to say that Mahomes isn't set up for success. I mean, the last 4 quarterbacks to face the Buccaneers have thrown for at least 1 passing touchdown. Cousins just roasted them for 4 last week. Lamar Jackson had 5 on them the week before that. What was it? Going back even before that, it was Cousins again for that 500-yard game that he had on TNF. So there are ways that Mahomes can get there from a passing standpoint. But if we do assume that this is going to be a game where the Bucs are going to struggle to fight back without having Godwin or Evans in the lineup, I would say Cousins matchup does it. It is a bit more conducive to fantasy scoring than what we see from Mahomes and the Chiefs.
Yeah. All right. So looking at my rankings here, I have Mahomes 6 and I have Cousins 7. Honestly, thinking about it more, I would maybe flip those a little bit. I do like the idea of Cousins throwing more in this game. The Falcons have an implied point total of 27.5. They're number 3. The Chiefs have an implied point total of 27.25. They're number 4. And so I think these teams are going to score roughly the same number of points. I think more of those fantasy points for the Falcons are going to be attached to Kirk Cousins than the Chiefs fantasy points will be attached to Patrick Mahomes. But a good spot for both of these guys in general. Yeah, even though I right now have Mahomes ranked just 1 spot ahead of Cousins, I would probably flip that. And when I update rankings after the show, I'll probably have them flipped now that I've kind of walked through it a little bit more. Good question. Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
By the way, for everyone who is joining us right now, I'm Freedman. He's Chris Allen. We're going through your fantasy football questions. If we don't get to your question, check out the free start sit tool that we have on the site. Check out the free rankings that we have on the site. We've gotten rest of season question. We have rest of season rankings on the site managed by our guy Waz. And then for the weekly rankings, we have Ian, Waz, Charch, Dwayne, and I also have rankings in there. So just be sure to check out all of the tools that we have. And then of course we got the content there. I write fantasy articles each week highlighting the players that I really like. Chris, you write the wide receiver cornerback matchup piece. And then, of course, just a ton of other content on the site. Free. Be sure to check it out. We appreciate all of you being in here with us. All right, let's get on to the next question here. Would you go with Eagles or Saints this week for survivor pool?
All right.
All right. This is a good question. I need to put on my survivor pool hat. By the way, so each week I was just talking about content. I have a best bets article on the site that I publish. It's free. In that article, I highlight the teams that I would look at for survivor that week. And so Saints, number one for me. They're going against the Panthers.
Yep.
Beautiful. That you almost don't need to say anything else except they're going against the Panthers. And you almost certainly, I mean, I say almost certainly, given that you're asking this question, you haven't used the Saints yet. So they are on the board for you. And you are almost never going to want to use the Saints again, right? Like this is the point where they're going to be favored by the most points out of any game that they have this season going against the Panthers. It's hard to go wrong picking against the Panthers. And in week one, I mean, I know that was a long time ago. The Saints are a different team, but in week one, a 47-10 victory against the Panthers. Like the Panthers aren't just like the worst team in the league. They are the worst team by margin. Teams on average have been covering against the Panthers by over 10 points. Like, so this is a situation where absolutely love the Saints against the Panthers for multiple reasons. Great matchup, and you're at the high point for the Saints. So you're just checking them off your list at the optimal time when it makes sense to be using them. So very much like the Saints this week. The Eagles, I mean, sure, like they're fine, but there will be other spots. But great matchup for the Eagles, but there will probably be other spots this year when you could use the Eagles. And so I feel like in that capacity, it makes sense to save them. Chris,
use them week 14 against the Panthers. They play the Panthers in week 14.
Exactly. You're saving them for week 14.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, Chris, do you ever do any survivor pools?
I have actually. I've helped my wife in her survivor pool league, which actually she said she picked the Bengals in week one, so it didn't work out. But yeah, either way, I've helped out a couple of times, like from that standpoint, and trying to think about it from that angle. Which team would I want to use now, and who would I want to save for a later date? That's the typical strategy that I try and apply. So thinking about it from this week. New Orleans gets Carolina, and then I can save a solid defensive unit like the Eagles for later on in the season when my options become a bit thinner, and then you also get them going up against the Panthers. So I like that approach.
Yeah, and then one more team that I would mention, the Vikings. The Vikings will probably never be favored by as many points again for the rest of the year, favored by 5.5 against the Colts. So like they would also be an option just in terms of like you're getting a team that is at home, that's favored by more than a field goal, and you're getting them at kind of like the right time in their schedule. That said, I'm going with the Saints, but like the Vikings, you know, like if you want to be a little bit contrarian, and if you think, okay, you know what, the Saints going against a divisional opponent, this is their second game, so maybe there's a little bit of a rematch factor where the Panthers kind of learn some lessons from things that didn't go well the first time. Like it's like divisional game, anything can happen in a divisional game. You know what I mean? So like if you're taking that contrarian approach, the Vikings would be a possible option. I don't think they're going to be heavily used in picks contest this week, or survivor contest this week, but like it's a decent spot for them. So that would also be an option if you just want to be a little contrarian. All right, next one here from Jawan. Pick 2, Rico, Rashad White, or Hopkins, flex play, full PPR. So 2 of these guys, Rico, Rashad White, DeAndre Hopkins. We talked about DeAndre Hopkins earlier and just a little pessimistic about the role that he has within that Chiefs offense and the utilization he's going to have this week as a big home favorite. Rashad White, tough situation for him in a backfield where he just now is like pretty clearly no longer the main top guy within that work, within that backfield, splitting work with Bucky, who might be like the more talented player potentially. And then Rico Dowdle returning from being out last week. I would go probably with Dowdle and White.
Mm-hmm.
Just the fact that they're running backs, you can kind of project their usage a little bit more, and just skepticism about DeAndre Hopkins and his new role within that offense, and the fact that they might not need to use him all that much this week.
Yeah, I agree with that approach. And I wanted to pull up the utilization report, again, available on fantasylife.com, to show how much both how Rashad White was used this past week without Godwin and Evans in the lineup. So still working in as the, let's say, like RB2-ish, like from a rushing standpoint, but 13% of the team's targets as well. So if we think this is going to be another game where the Bucks try and keep everything in the short area of the field, because we saw Cade Otton, it was like Cade Otton, Rashad White, and Bucky Irving. Like those were the three, like in terms of like the primary pass catchers, like for the Buccaneers last week, trying to keep everything in front of Baker Mayfield, short area stuff, using him on play action concepts to get the ball out of his hands and letting his receivers work after the catch. That was the game plan for success for last week. And with Bucky Irving also popping up on the injury report just this past week with a toe injury, I think it was DMP and then LP to close out the week. So if there's any chance that there's a, let's say, lesser version of Irving in this offense for this week, I would say that at least lends itself to having some more opportunities for a guy like Rashad White, who, while he's not the most efficient rusher, and especially going up against the Chiefs defense, we're not expecting a ton of efficiency. But from a full PPR standpoint, if he's getting a few more targets, I do like White from that standpoint.
Mm-hmm. And to your point on Bucky Irving, the back-to-back DMPs followed by the limited practice and then questionable.
Right.
I assume he is going to play because he had that same practice pattern last week and played, but I don't think he's going to be at like exact full capacity for him. All right. So question here from Big Birds. Shout out Big Birds. All right. We got Chris Olave, Devontae Smith. We talked about him earlier. Chuba Hubbard. We talked about him earlier. And Jaden Reed, whom we also talked about earlier. Haven't talked about Chris Olave yet. Absolutely love Olave in this spot. If you look at the guys on this offense who are out, so no Rashid Shaheed, no Bub Means, and so you have Olave as like the guy out there. And then he gets back Derek Carr, fantastic bump for the total offense and getting their starting quarterback back. And then, of course, going against the Panthers, who are one of the worst defenses in the league. You put all of that together, the Panthers number 31 in defensive pass DVOA, Chris Olave, given what he did last week, 14 targets, of course, without Derek Carr, but the bigger point is without other players within that offense, 14 targets, 107 yards. Absolutely love this spot for Olave. I feel like he's in must start territory, like, wide receiver one type of play for me. I would go with Jaden Reed. And then at that point, it's a question between Devontae Smith and Chuba Hubbard. Looking at it more, I would go with I would probably go with Smith, actually. But I could see the case for Hubbard if you're looking at wanting to have the higher floor. That just comes with like the projectable touches with the running back. But I would probably go with the three wide receivers there. Chris, how do you break this down?
I don't have a problem with that. I would say that because the downside for Chuba Hubbard is that like he's not a wide receiver in this matchup because the Saints secondary is either sick or injured.
Yes.
Marshawn Lattimore supposed to be out. Tyrann Mathieu dealing with an illness. He's supposed to play, but he might be at like a lesser capacity. Rico Payton, one of their other cornerbacks, also like DMP throughout the week. So it's like the Saints secondary is the way that you would want to target this matchup. So for Jaden Reed, we already talked about him. Devonta Smith, we already talked about him. And Chris Olave, locked in like wide receiver 1 for this week. My only concern, and I know everybody else is probably thinking it too, is that they'll have to contend with Taysom Hill and whatever BS that Hill is going to do once they get into scoring position, which he tends to do on a week in, week out basis anyway, as well, assuming he's healthy, or when he's healthy rather. So I would say that's the only downside to Chris Olave, is that Taysom Hill and his rushing or being used as a pass catcher or whatever is the only downside for Chris Olave. That's about it.
Yeah, think about Chuba Hubbard a little bit more in the spot. I mean, the Panthers underdogs, and then as you mentioned, going against a secondary that is incredibly depleted, especially at cornerback. And so the Panthers as dogs might need to throw a little bit anyway, and because of the matchup that they have, extra incentivized to look to attack. And yeah, you mentioned number 1 cornerback Marshawn Lattimore out, Rico Payton almost certainly out with the DNPs for 3 straight days. The corner who normally starts opposite Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, he's out on IR, and then Kool-Aid McKinstry is also out. So it's like they're missing like 4 of their 5 cornerbacks. Like this is like catastrophe situation for the Saints secondary there. So yeah, I think that means Chuba Hubbard probably doesn't get as much work as you would hope, and that puts me to the wide receivers. All right, question from Andrew. Hey, Andrew. By the way, we're like an hour into the show, and I am finally remembering to tell you to hit the like button.
Yes.
Professional podcaster am I. Hit the like button. Do us a solid. We appreciate all of you being here. All right, Andrew Mang. Hey, full PPR, JSN or Ladd McConkey. All right, so the offense for the Seahawks last week without DK Metcalf was very unappetizing. And it could be a situation where that is just what that offense looks like without him. And so even though in theory, the absence of Metcalf is a good thing for JSN because he could have more targets coming his way, potentially like an overabundance of targets. But there's like the question of the quality of those targets. Of course, Ladd McConkey, even though the Chargers are throwing more, they are still not a pass-heavy offense. And so you balance that out. I go with JSN, but I don't really feel good about it.
I understand that, because the hope would be that JSN would be a bit more efficient, even with the targets that he's earned. He had 12 targets, I believe, like back in week 4, and we still didn't see a ton of production from him. So I understand, but he also he has DK Metcalf out this week. Also Noah Fant is out this week for the Seahawks.
Good point.
Which should allow for a few more targets to go his way. So I would give the edge to JSN, but I can understand with McConkey being the more efficient of the 2 receivers why you want to lean in that direction. But if it's full PPR, JSN.
Yes. Yeah, full PPR. You ask yourself this question: which one of these guys has the better chance of having 10 targets? And I think without question, it's JSN.
Yeah, but who inspires more joy? It's probably Ladd.
We got to stop with the who inspires more joy. I can't think of a time where that has worked out for us.
Right. It's after the fact they do not inspire joy.
Yeah. No, if we're thinking about joy, we end up just getting a world of pain when we ask that question. All right. Superflex, Caleb or Flacco? All right, this is a question that I love, because like Joe Flacco, the guy just comes out and throws 300 yards. It feels like almost every week. Like that is just what he does. Professional quarterback. Caleb Williams, it feels like week to week he certainly has more upside, but I'd say he also has more downside. And so I think that might just kind of factor into a little bit the way that you approach this. The Vikings defense, not as real the second month of the season as it was the first month of the season. And so the matchup, not quite as terrible as it maybe once seemed. The Cardinals defense is certainly exploitable. So good matchup for Caleb Williams. How are you splitting this decision here?
Yeah, that's where I'm kind of at too, because the matchup against the Cardinals from a DVP standpoint, the Cardinals have been one of the more advantageous matchups for opposing quarterbacks, sitting right now at 6th in fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position. So if we will want to hope that Caleb Williams would have a better game, not see as much pressure, being able to read
Yeah.
the full field and get the ball out to his receivers, this would be the matchup that we would want for him. So I give the lean to Caleb Williams here, but I would say that given the way that he's operated so far, and also the fact that he's going up against another defensive-minded head coach in Jonathan Gannon, who we just watched Caleb Williams struggle against the Commanders and Dan Quinn. They blitzed on over 35% of his dropbacks, got pressure on over 40% of his dropbacks as well. I'm wondering if Gannon serves up a similar type of day for Caleb Williams, but I would say all things being equal, Caleb has the better matchup. He also has the better receiving core in front of him, so Caleb Williams would be my answer.
All right. I think my answer is Caleb has the better median outcome. Flacco probably has the better floor outcome. So, like, whichever one of those you're kind of wanting to prioritize is the one that I would go with. If you just want to make sure this guy doesn't screw up and gets you some fantasy points, I would probably go with Flacco. If you're thinking like, which one of these guys on average probably does better, I would go with Caleb Williams.
Okay.
All right, wide receiver and flex question from Herb. Pick two: Bigsby, Pittman, Shakir, or Dobbs. Haven't mentioned Dobbs, I think in like a few shows that we've done. It feels like he's kind of fallen off of the radar, but still someone who is attached to a good quarterback and a good offense. And with Jordan Love almost certain to play this week, he hasn't taken like the tumble down the ranks that he otherwise could have if it had been Malik Willis out there. We also haven't talked about Michael Pittman, who like Downs does get a significant boost this week with Flacco returning to the starting lineup. So a good situation for him. We talked about Khalil Shakir earlier as like the slot receiver within that Bills offense. Great connection he has established with Josh Allen. We haven't talked about Tank Bigsby yet, who is, certainly taken over that backfield for the Jags. Although there is not like I would say significant injury concern with Tank Bigsby, but he is dealing with an ankle issue. Practiced every day this week, but he was limited every day in practice this week and enters this week questionable. Expecting him to play, but maybe with that injury and with the potential return of Travis Etienne, Bigsby doesn't have the same workload that we previously saw. So if we're looking for two here, so wide receiver and a flex, the wide receiver I would go with is Michael Pittman. And then if we are looking to flex between Dobbs, Shakir, and Bigsby, I'm going with Bigsby, but it's not a slam dunk. Shakir would be the one that I would probably most consider going with if I didn't go with Bigsby. How are you looking at this?
Yeah, I would say Shakir is probably the one that I would also agree with you there. It's one that I would probably want to flex. Dobbs has been more of the volatile receiver within the Packers pass catching group just because he does play primarily on the perimeter. And even though he's had over 20% of the team's targets over the past couple of weeks, if weather is going to be a concern, then which we noted earlier, then that would be the guy that I would say would be the one that would be kind of slightly left out to the side. Now, of course, he can always get there on one pass. Jordan Love can be somebody, Dobbs is down there somewhere and just huck it downfield and Dobbs can come down with it. But if we're just looking for median outcomes, say Shakir, Pittman are probably the two that offer the highest upside from that regard, considering Bigsby's coming in with an ankle injury, likely to share the backfield with Etienne, who's also dealing with his own ailments. I'd say Pittman and Shakir are probably the best two out of that group.
Yep. All right, the next question. Is Coker going to be this week's Cedric Tillman, given the state of the Saints secondary? Would you start him over Hopkins? All right, so let's start with the Hopkins part of this question. Coker versus Hopkins. We talked about DeAndre Hopkins earlier and just the full-blown skepticism that I have that you can trust him at this point within that Chiefs offense. And then Jalen Coker, who everyone on the site has been super enthusiastic about this week, dubbing themselves Cokeheads. The number one receiver for the Panthers last week, no Deontay Johnson there. Adam Thielen not returning yet. So big opportunity for Jalen Coker. And then Xavier Legette also popped up on the injury report. Let me check this really quick just to make sure I have the details right. So Xavier Legette popped up on the injury report in the middle of the week with a toe injury. So practiced fully on Friday and then limited on, practiced fully on Wednesday, limited on Thursday and Friday, technically questionable entering this game. I do think we see Xavier Legette, but with the toe injury, I don't think we see the full run out for him that we otherwise could have had. So that means Jalen Coker, as the rookie, could still be the number one wide receiver in this offense this week. And then, as David mentioned in the question, Saints secondary in shambles. So I would go with Jalen Coker. And like, I will say, like, I feel a little bit, you know what? I don't even feel dirty about it. You know what? If I feel dirty about it, I feel dirty about it in the good way, if you know what I mean. Like, Jalen Coker actually, like, he could go off. Like, he's big, he's athletic, he's a rookie. So like, he could be getting better from here on out. And DeAndre Hopkins, like, love DeAndre Hopkins, but he's just not the player he used to be. And he's new in a system where they might not really need to use him at all. And then especially this week as big home favorites, they might not need to use him. So I'm going with Jalen Coker. And like, I want to feel disgusting about it, but I don't really even feel that disgusting about it.
Should you play Jalen Coker this week over DeAndre Hopkins? Yes. Is he this week's Cedric Tillman?
No.
Yes. I would say, like, from a hype standpoint. From a hype standpoint.
Yes. From a hype standpoint. Yes.
But now I will just say, I will take on your role and I will be the wet blanket of the bunch and say that, remember a few weeks ago when we were like, oh, Dontavian Wicks is going to be the guy?
Yes.
I'm just saying that is in the range of outcomes where we just see him thrust into this full starting role and things don't wind up working out the way that we expect them to. So
yes,
I'm with you. Like, Coker played over 70% of his snaps from the interior in week 8. It does lend itself a bit more to where Bryce Young is at as a passer right now. We've seen him pepper Adam Thielen in that same role from the slot in like last year and earlier this season. So I say the matchup and the usage all line up for Coker, but just remember, we've seen these guys where it's like, let's give him let's make the whole plane out of this wide receiver, and then they wind up not working out for us. So just keep that in mind as you rush to go thrust Jalen Coker into your lineup.
Okay, I think the Cedric Tillman, in terms of the hype factor, 100%. The difference is Tillman got there last week. I think the Dontavian Wicks call out is fantastic because more often than not, the guys who get super hyped end up performing more like Wicks than like Cedric Tillman. And Coker, even though he's got potential, and I love the matchup for him, and in the comparison with Hopkins, definitely go with Coker. But if it's just like Coker versus whatever other normal wide receiver, I'd probably be inclined to go with that other wide receiver, but I don't know. I mean, the hype for Coker, like the enthusiasm for Coker, is certainly real. All right. Evan Ingram or Njoku, full PPR. Thank you. You are welcome, Blake. All right. By the way, almost 15 minutes left in the show. Do us a solid, smash the like button. Just absolutely hit the like button like you're trying to kill a fly. All right. Evan Ingram versus David Njoku. Ingram, as the player that, or one of the players I highlighted in my Freedman's Favorites article this week, love the situation that he has going for him. Certainly no Christian Kirk in this game. And you can just look back at what Ingram has been able to do in his time without Christian Kirk. I mean, smaller sample, granted, just 5 games last year. But in those 5 games, Evan Ingram, 10.4 targets, 14.8 fantasy points per game. And that's without Christian Kirk. There's also the chance he's without Brian Thomas Jr. and or Gabe Davis in this game. So Evan Ingram as the middle of the field option for the Jags could legit be the number 1 pass catcher for the Jags this week. So great situation for him. And going against the Eagles, you look at what they've allowed tight ends to do recently. Just last week, Mike Gesicki without T. Higgins had one of the best games of his season. 8 targets, 73 yards. And so we could have something similar for Evan Engram. I like him a lot. That said, I mean, David Njoku is David Njoku, and he's also dealing with the situation of no Amari Cooper and really importantly, no Deshaun Watson. I go with Evan Engram, but like I would say this is probably a coin flip.
I would say that for David Njoku, if it wasn't for Elijah Moore popping up for 11 targets out of the slot last week, I would say I would give the lean to Njoku with the upgrade at quarterback and also the offense as a whole being a bit more efficient. But if we know that there's a stronger path to Evan Engram getting double-digit targets in this matchup for this week, I would go towards Engram.
All right. You know what? Let me rephrase what I just said. I think I said I would lean Evan Engram. I lied. I would lean towards David Njoku, but I have Njoku 4, Engram 5, and here's the difference for me. Engram, his game kicks off at 4:05. The Browns are playing at 1. And so like we know the situation with Njoku, but Evan Engram could end up having both Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas in his game. And if that happens, I would be going with Njoku. And so I'm probably just going to go with Njoku in general because like I know what his situation is. So I feel like hard to go wrong either way. But the fact that we don't know what the situation is between those two guys when you have to make that decision probably pushes me a little bit towards Njoku. All right, another tight end question here from Raquel. Mark Andrews versus TJ Hawkinson in PPR. Thanks. You are welcome, Raquel. So TJ Hawkinson, we talked about him earlier in the situation where he is coming back from injury, uncertain as to how much he's going to play, what his role will be. Mark Andrews, we have seen him get a boost in usage in recent weeks and production, but now a big home favorite going against the Broncos. It might be a game where as almost 10-point favorites, like 9.5-point favorites, the Ravens just run the ball and really don't need to use Mark Andrews all that much. I have Andrews just a little bit ahead of Hawkinson, and as a site, we have them neck and neck. Andrews just a little bit ahead of Hawkinson. How are you looking at these two guys?
I would say that just given the amount of time that the number of consecutive weeks we've seen with Andrews over 15% target share, that's now 3 weeks straight, and also getting end zone targets makes me a bit more comfortable starting Andrews over Hawkinson. And what we don't know how that offense is going to react with him back in the lineup, and also the shift along the offensive line. So I would rather go with Andrews, even if they are going to be heavy favorites. We might see things shift more towards the run game, like once we get later into that contest for the Ravens. But still, given how he's been used so far over the past few weeks, route rate up, target share looking strong, I would say Andrews is the better option out of those two.
All right, we've got a rest of season question. I would encourage everyone, when you have rest of season questions, of course, you can ask us on the show. We'd love to answer those, but you can also check out the rest of season rankings that we have on the site done by our guy Waz. All right, the question here, Tracy Jr. or Chubb rest of season? I mean, Tracy has looked so good and so explosive, through the few games in which he's been the lead back, that I would be tempted to go with him. Love Nick Chubb, but still returning from injury, still on the, at this point, kind of older side of his career. I would probably go Tracy. I feel like if you ask yourself, like, which one of these guys is going to be a potential league winner, or like which one of these guys has the potential to give me like 100 yards every game, it is probably not Nick Chubb at this point of his career. And it probably won't happen with Tracy either because of the offense that he's in, but I think he's got at least more potential to do that. So I would go with Tyrone Tracy. What are your thoughts?
I agree, which sucks because we know that Chubb is one of the better pure runners in the league as of right now. And even with me being a Bengals fan, seeing him back out there in the field was excellent so far over the past couple of weeks. And the hope would be he takes over more of the backfield as he gets back up to game speed. But looking at their upcoming schedule, so they get the Saints coming out of their bye in week 11, but then it's Pittsburgh, Denver, Pittsburgh again, KC, and then Cincinnati in week 16. So like those 4 out of those 5 matchups aren't all that great. But for the Giants, they get Tampa Bay, Dallas, New Orleans, Baltimore, and then Atlanta in week 16. All of those are neutral or positive matchups for the Giants. So even if you are depending on Daniel Jones to get you like closer to the red zone, say from a utilization standpoint, also from an efficiency standpoint, and also the schedule that I just mentioned, Tracy is probably the better option out of those two.
Yeah, and our guy Waz in the rest of the season rankings has Tracy and Chubb literally right next to each other. So this is close. I would prefer Tracy just because of the upside that I think he has at this point in his career relative to Chubb. All right, let's see. Presumably, we are going to get another question here.
What do the folks want? What questions do they have?
Yeah, we'll just look at the chat. All right, Spectacular Sunday Morning. Would you start Dobbins or Dobbs in your flex this week, full PPR? This question is from Arrogant Baztard. Like that one. All right. So the question here, Dobbins or Dobbs? I would be going with Dobbins. Just because of the usage that he's been getting. We talked about Dobbs earlier. Smart by people to point out the weather issues for Dobbs potential, and then also just like he's not really like close to being the number one guy within his offense. Whereas like for the Chargers, a lot of the offense is running through Dobbins.
Yeah, I think that's an easier call. He hasn't had the explosive plays that he had over the first 2 to 3 weeks, which anybody could have told you that ripping off 20 to 30 yard runs on a week-to-week basis wasn't as sustainable. But if he's still the one getting over 50% of the team's carries once they get inside the 5, over 60% of the team's carries as a rusher, it's easy to see where Dobbins over Dobbs is the better choice there.
All right. From Paul DeSantis, Goff versus Dak. All right. So Goff playing in that weather game in Green Bay. So that, I think makes him a little bit more uncertain. You have Dak playing in the dome. Of course, like Dak really just hasn't been like his full blown self to this point in the season. So, some potential concerns there. I lean towards Dak, but not, I'd say like not a slam dunk. Where are you on this?
I would also lean towards Dak, but and you know this better than anybody, Freedman, that Dak is just he is an aggressive thrower. That is just who he is. If there's a tight window throw available for Dak Prescott to throw it to, like that is the choice that he's going to make, which at sometimes is great because it can lead to explosive plays, touchdowns, and all of that. But at other times it can turn into interceptions. But I will say that going up against the Falcons secondary has been productive for opposing passers over the past few weeks. Last 4 weeks, every quarterback to face the Falcons has thrown for 2 passing touchdowns or more. The only one to not get over 200 passing yards was Baker Mayfield, and that was like over a month ago when they first in their first matchup against the Falcons. That was that TNF matchup where Kirk Cousins threw for over 500 yards. So still, I would say the Falcons secondary lends itself enough so that we can see the production out of CD, Jake Ferguson, like all the rest of those guys. So I lean towards Dak, but I get it.
All right. Question from Cade Kleinschmidt. We got Brian Thomas, Brian Robinson, Ladd, or Tony Pollard. I mean, look, if 3 of these guys have some injury concerns, and that like Brian Thomas, is he going to play? Brian Robinson was listed questionable after practicing limitedly all week. Tony Pollard didn't practice at all this week. Technically questionable, but some concerns as to whether he ends up playing. Right now, I go with Brian Robinson under the assumption that he plays. Significant favorite. We're favored by more than a field goal against the Giants, and if he's active, you would expect gets pretty significant usage. How are you looking at these 4 guys?
So Ladd is probably the easiest of the 4, just from a health standpoint. Efficiency, we can toss that aside. I would say though, if you are looking for some punch, if you are looking for upside, I would consider Brian Thomas Jr. He is expected to play, but on that same note, in that same game rather, Darius Slay is expected to be out for the Eagles. So if there is a chance that you can get some of those explosive plays from a guy like Brian Thomas Jr., I'd say I would consider him as the second guy, like over Brian Robinson, who has the hamstring injury, the knee injury from a couple weeks ago, team elevated Chris Rodriguez, so on and so forth.
Yeah. All right. Next question here. All right. I'm just going to call an audible here since we're not getting it done. Shakir or Pittman as a flex here. Shakir or Pittman, question from Matthew Drynan. All right. We talked about Pittman earlier. Gets the big upgrade with Joe Flacco as the starting quarterback this week, even though I think that means more for Downs than it means for Pittman. Still, obviously, really good news for Pittman. With Khalil Shakur, we know what he is. He's got the established connection with Josh Allen, but he's still like in a kind of jumble with the other two main wide receivers in that offense. They're all kind of low-end wide receiver threes. I go towards Michael Pittman. Just in terms of like, I think he's got the ability to have like a 100-yard game. I think we're just going to see more passing. The Colts as road underdogs in this spot, likely to be throwing a lot. They're in a dome and they're going against a Vikings defense that I think is more vulnerable than people would expect based on what they did in the first month of the season. So I go towards Pittman. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's where we can see, to your point, we can see Amari Cooper get a bit more involved, even though he was limited in practice throughout the week with the wrist injury. We could see Keon Coleman has the tougher matchup, primarily working on the outside, but we could see Dalton Kincaid, any of the other guys, and of course, Josh Allen, once he gets into the red zone, if he turns out to be a runner. So Pittman versus Shakir, with the upgrade that we get with the Colts passing game with Joe Flacco being under center, I'd say it's Pittman. He's looked a bit better, and this is the same guy that 2 weeks ago it was potential back injury that was going to put him on IR. Not that bad as of right now.
Yeah. All right. So we have a few more questions left, a few more minutes left. I want to thank everyone for being with us. And if we don't get to your question and these final questions here, a reminder, go to the site, check out the free start sit tool that we have, check out the free fantasy rankings that we have. And, you know, if you are a subscriber to the FantasyLife Plus package that we have, you can also check out all of the projections that we have on the site. Dwayne McFarland has his player projections. I have my player projections, and you also get access to my rankings and Dwayne's rankings within the tool that we have on the site. Go check it all out. And then, of course, all the content as well. All right. Question from Paul: Dak or Knicks and sit one, London, Mooney, Coleman, McMillan, and full PPR. Let's start with Dak versus Knicks. Knicks is one of the quarterbacks I wrote up this week. Really like the situation for him, even though he's on the road, even though he is a big underdog. He's going against a Ravens defense that has been very friendly to quarterbacks this year. And because of the running ability that Knicks has, I think he's got a reasonable floor. That said, Dak is also in a really good spot. I would go with Dak. What are your thoughts on that quarterback situation?
I'm with you there. I prefer Dak, just the upside of him as a passer. I get it. Knicks like performed well just this past week. Threw for 3, ran in for another 1, but it was against the Panthers, y'all. I would like to assume that Zach Orr, the defensive coordinator for the Ravens, puts up at least a good enough game plan to limit what Knicks can do. The rushing floor will always be there. I think the upside as a passer is there is more akin to what Dak can do than what Knicks can do like through the air. So I'm with you. I think it's Dak.
All right, and then out of the guys that you're sitting, McMillan. I'm sitting McMillan. Nothing
Yeah,
wrong
also
with him, but
popped
he's
up with
also
a hamstring
injury.
injury. Yeah.
So sitting McMillan pretty easily there.
Yep.
All right. Next question that we have coming up on the board. It's not popping up here, so we're just going to go with the one that I see at the top from Tyler Sperry. Ferguson or Otten, and then Reed or Coleman. And so looking at the two tight ends first, Ferguson, the I'd say the number 2 pass catcher there for the Cowboys.
Mm-hmm.
But Cade Otton, I mean, potentially like the number 1 pass catcher
Yeah.
for the Bucks. Wouldn't have expected that entering the season, but I mean, this is where we are. I'm going with Cade Otton here. And then I think this is a question of Jaden Reed versus Coleman.
Keon Coleman.
For me, it's easily Reed under the assumption that Jordan Love plays. There's still some weather issues in that game, but I would be going with Jaden Reed. What are your thoughts here, Chris?
Agree. Even if for Cade Otton, even though they are going up against the Chiefs, and the assumption would be that Baker Mayfield sees more pressure on more than 12% of his dropbacks, is what he saw last week. The Chiefs give up the second most points to tight ends, and that's according to our DVP tool. So Otton for sure. And then Reed, just given them not just the matchup, and even the weather conditions, you do have to, like, in order to beat the Detroit Lions, you beat them through the slot, and that's where Reed typically gets deployed. So I would give it to Reed for sure.
All right. Great stuff, Chris. Great stuff, everyone involved in asking us the questions. We very much appreciate it. I thought this was a pretty fun time here. Some really good questions in the chat. And we will be back next week. But again, if we didn't get to your questions, go to the site, check out the tools we have there, the rankings, the start sit tool, and hopefully you can get some insight from there. And I tell you what, I'm going to jump on Twitter after this, and I'll just do a quick AMA kind of Q&A. We can keep this going a little bit there if you have some questions. But this was great for Chris, for Freedman. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a fantastic week 9, everybody.